Is your ranch investable? Let's find out. Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Today, you will be hearing from Chris Rawley with Harvest Returns, and we're going to be talking about what makes ranches investable, and better yet, why you want an investable ranch. So Chris is going to kind of dive into what he sees from his perspective working with ranchers who are either seeking outside investors to help them grow their operation, or even those who simply want to go the route of going to the bank and getting a note to grow. So, whichever situation you most closely relate to, Chris is going to talk about it today. It's a short and sweet episode that's going to get you thinking and going to get you on track for having that investable operation. Remember to hit subscribe and leave a rating or review on whichever platform you're listening to. I know the majority of you are still listening to audio, and hey, I love it. That's why I started the podcast, right? You can listen while you feed cows, fix fence, haul bulls, whatever it may be. But I know a lot of you are finding me on YouTube, and that's great too. So whichever platform you're on, hit subscribe, leave a rating or review. I love to see it. But with that, let's visit with Chris. Well, Chris, it's been a few years, but welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad we could make it work again.
Really glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Shaye.
Chris, jumping right into the conversation today, where we're talking about making ranches investable, I want your perspective on why it's so important that a ranch is investable.
Yeah, well, I don't know of very many ranches or cattle operators these days that don't operate with some kind of outside funding, whether that's just debt, operating loans, or potentially outside investors, which we can talk in more detail about, especially given the price of cattle these days and people trying to expand, rebuild their herds, that sort of thing, or add new land or infrastructure. So when I say investable, we're primarily talking about outside investors, but all the same principles apply when you're going to, seek out a new loan, that sort of thing, whether it's a banker you've had an existing relationship with for a long time or possibly a new one, but especially if you're trying to bring in some outside capital. And we talk to folks that are doing that all the time.
Now, you're specifically in this space talking to folks who want to be outside investors in ranches, or even vice versa, ranchers who are looking for that through your company, Harvest Returns. Tell us a little bit more about who Harvest Returns is, and specifically how you're working with the American rancher today.
So we started up in 2016, so we've been around for nearly a decade. We have invested in the livestock space, and I'll say livestock because we've done some sheep as well as cattle, but for that amount of time, and roughly $20 million we've deployed in that space. And the way we work is we have a pool of investors, and these are all folks that are interested in agriculture, livestock production, that sort of thing. And we essentially take their money, pool it, and then we work with producer or operator to come onto their company as a single investor. So whether that's doing a note, a loan, some sort of equity investment or partnership where we take a piece of their company and then we generate returns to our investors. That's the whole premise of our company is two sides, helping producers raise capital, but then bringing investors with an investment that they're going to feel really good about adding to their portfolio, and most importantly, they're going to see some return on, make some money on.
Absolutely. And if you are interested, those listening out there, Chris and I dove deeper into what Harvest Returns is and does in our previous podcast. So what I'll do is I'll make sure to put a link to that in the description. And if you're listening and can't find it after the show, just go ahead and shoot me a message on either social media or my website, and I'll make sure you get that, because it really is an interesting model. Because as Chris talked about earlier, there are very few ranchers who aren't needing some sort of outside help, whether it's investors, going to a loan officer, whatever it may be, just to keep things running, keep growing. There's a variety of reasons. It's, we always say land rich, cash poor, and that's kind of the business we're in, a lot of us. So it's very unique and needed. So Chris, When we're talking about, making a ranch more investable, I think we sometimes need to take a step back and say, how can ranchers determine if they are already investable and to what degree? So, what can ranchers do? What questions can they ask to determine how investable they already are?
It really comes down, from our perspective, to actually understanding their operation. We have either talked to or invested in just about every flavor of livestock operation there is, from stocker, feeder, cow, calf, grass fed, regenerative, all those things, genetics. We recently made an investment into a processor. So we've seen kind of all sides of the business. And the one thing that those that we consider investable, they all have the solid plan. They know what their program is. When I say what their program is, not just, how are they raising their cattle? I think, the vast majority of people in this business are really good at the animal husbandry side of things, taking care of animals, that sort of thing, and even getting them to market. But the money ties to all that. How that ties is really important. So, what does their balance sheet look like? What does their profit and loss statement look like? How are they selling? If they are going to expand their operation, how are they going to sell those cattle? Also, how are the investors going to get a return? So that could be as simple as, hey, I've got a note and I got to pay debt service on it, and then I got to pay it back at some point. That's important. Or if it's an equity investment where people are actually taking an ownership, a part of your operation, then how are you going to distribute that money back to them at some point, whether it's through annual distributions, or you're going to eventually refinance the money that they've invested and buy them out, that sort of thing, or you're going to sell your whole company, your whole operation, which is pretty rare in this business. People want to keep it and pass it on for the next generation.
Absolutely. It's a long game, is a lot of us talk about it. So, okay, just recapping what you said, really talking about knowing your current financial state and having that sound business model as far as what you're selling, who you're selling it to, and what's your game plan for making sure you can pay back investors, and also that growth plan for where you want to go. Being organized. So, Chris, say a rancher is out there listening and kind of runs through that checklist, and they're thinking, I'm not quite there yet. What is their first step to becoming more investable?
Something that we see is common across ranching, livestock production is ranchers have complex operations. Sometimes they're ranching on their land, sometimes they're ranching on other family members' land, or lease land, their neighbor's land, whatever. Sometimes it's a combination of all three. And that's something that we accept, because especially if you're a growing rancher, not everybody starts out with, 50,000 acres dream ranch. You've got to start somewhere, especially if you're a younger producer or you're just trying to expand what you've got. So the important thing about that is they need to document and understand what they have, and they need to be prepared to present that. So that's what we call transparency, and closely tied to that is the financial reporting that goes along. So if you have a balance sheet, it needs to adequately reflect all your assets, whether that's real estate, land, or the cattle themselves, the livestock themselves, and all the debts. So you've got operating loans, you've got real estate loans, you've got, oftentimes they're in different entities. So somebody might have a homestead and they may have their ranch on a different balance sheet, and that's all fine. But as you prepared to seek outside investment, you need to be able to document that and show that all.
Chris, how important is it, or what emphasis is your team or investors making or taking in when you're looking at an operation, the kind of team they have? Do they have good mentorship or guidance from people in the areas that matter most to them? For some, that might be, mentorship and guidance in genetics. For some, it might be finance. For some, it might be, maybe some niche marketing stuff. What emphasis are your people placing on that aspect of that team building aspect?
That's a great point, and we do feel it's very important. As I said, most of the folks we talk to, they're, I'm a third generation rancher, whatever. They know how to raise cows. They've got a great veterinarian team. They've got, the animal husbandry is all there. Oftentimes what they lack is that, that financial mentorship, somebody to help them. It doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be a family member. It doesn't have to be somebody that's in their direct employ, but it has to be somebody that knows what they're doing. So whether it's the marketing side, the finance, bookkeeping side, accounting, sales, you name it, they have to have all the functions, right? It doesn't have to always be in one person, but they have to have all the functions that make a successful business. And, all businesses are the same. You buy things or you produce things and then you sell them, hopefully at a higher price, and hopefully you make money. And ranching is no different than that. It's just, the mechanism is a little bit different.
So I'm curious about what some common mistakes ranchers make in the process of trying to become investable is. You already brought up the one about, if your balance sheets are different from like your homestead or your ranch and your numbers don't line up. But what are some other common mistakes you see?
Yeah, herd tracking and accountability, whatever form that takes, and that's a rapidly changing area. I know you've talked to some of those folks, and we've talked to some of those folks. So just as an aside, we also invest in agriculture technology, so early stage companies in the ag space that support the cattle industry. We've got a couple of those investments, and we talk to them all the time, including tracking software and technology solutions. So that's really important. If you can't account for your herd, how are the investors going to trust you? And unfortunately, there's some folks in the industry that have made it worse for everybody else because of their, phantom cattle, Ponzi scheme. We've all probably read about those, especially here in Texas the past few years. Some pretty big scams, essentially. And, unfortunately, these things go all the way back to like the late 1800s where ranchers out in the West brought in a bunch of investors from Scotland and rode them around and showed some cows and sent them back to Scotland. And they sent back big checks, and those cows were not even their own to begin with. So the phantom cattle thing is a big deal. And because of that, anybody, whether it's a banker or an outside investor, they want to make sure that you have a pretty good track of what your herd looks like, especially if you've got a big herd or it's on multiple pieces of land, that sort of thing. Or if you have one of those complex operations like I talked to where maybe it's part cow-calf, part feeding operation. It could be any combination. And we'd love to work with those kind of guys. We've got a really great customer that does all those things, and it's great. But he's pretty sophisticated and understands hedging and all those sorts of things. So that's probably, besides the not having good books in order, that's the next thing. This is kind of basic to anybody, but it's basic, but it's also something that you really don't know unless you're in this business. If you want to go out and raise money, and it's more than like, oh, I got, my family members or my, the rancher next door, we're going to go in together on something. That's one thing. But if you think you're going to go out and publicly raise money, there's some rules around that. So the Securities and Exchange Commission especially governs all that. And so the advice I'd give is don't try to do it yourself. Talk to either an attorney or folks like us that have done this, because you can quickly get yourself into trouble, even if your intentions are pure and good. Most people's are, but it's really easy to get in trouble, breaking rules around raising outside capital. It's called solicitation, public solicitation, raising capital without the proper legal documents in place. It can get pretty complicated pretty quick. So you need to get some outside help with that.
Well, Chris, as we kind of wrap up today, what's the main thing you want listeners to remember about our conversation?
Yeah, get your numbers in order, whether that's your herd numbers or your financials. If that is not your thing, and I realize it's not everybody's thing, hire somebody to do it for you. And these outside services are not bookkeeping services, accountants. Even some of the national ones are not that expensive. So it's well worth that investment to get a clean set of books that you can present to your banker or somebody else.
It'll take a lot of stress off you too.
If you know what's coming in and what's going out, that's a good starting point.
All right. Well, folks, if you are out there listening, I will make sure to put a link to Harvest Returns in the description, as well as a link to that previous episode that Chris and I did. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here, Shaye. Appreciate it.
All right. Remember, the best way to support this podcast and all your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review, and better yet, share it with a friend who will find this information valuable. Because podcasts still grow best by word of mouth. But with that, happy ranching, folks. Oh, and check us out on YouTube.